Hello and welcome back to Franklin Covey's On Leadership series. I serve as your weekly host and moderator, and we're now almost into our 150th episode after 3 years of podcast, and we've had a variety of guests that have joined us from around the world, typically best-selling authors, thought leaders, some celebrities, and other individuals that have an articulated point of view on leadership development, organizational culture, productivity, marketing, executing business strategy. And most of our guests hail from the Western Hemisphere. On occasion, we've had guests from outside of the U.S., as we are now the world's largest weekly leadership podcast. We are sincerely trying to make our guests represent and reflect the broad nature of Franklin Covey's imprint around the world. And today, I'd like to first thank our esteemed and trustworthy colleagues and partners in Franklin Covey's Pakistan office, who was able to inspire us with the story of our guest today and make this valuable connection. So first, to our colleagues and partners in our Pakistan office, thank you for lending us your credibility and connecting us with today's guest, Zafar Masud, who serves as the CEO of the Bank of Punjab in Pakistan, based in Lahore. And although he serves as the CEO of this bank, there is more to his story that you will learn here in just a moment. So invite me now to welcome Zafar Masud to On Leadership. How are you, sir? Great to see you and welcome.
It's wonderful to see you, Scott.
Zafar, so delighted you're here. We're taping this early morning in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the States. You are joining us from Lahore in Pakistan, just about 12 plus hours ahead of us, and we are honored that a person of your stature is able to join us today and invest the time in the millions of people who are both watching and listening to this interview.
The pleasure is all mine. It's an honor for me. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you, sir. Today, we're going to talk about two topics. We're going to talk about your view of leadership, culture, how the employees of the Bank of Punjab built this wonderful organization, the role that you and your board of directors have played throughout the pandemic and how that can be an inspiration to boards and leaders throughout the world. Before I talk about that, there probably are some guests that are wondering, why did we pick the CEO of the Bank of Punjab to be a reason beyond the fact that, you have some great leadership lessons to teach? And there's an interesting twist to your story. Just shy of about 10 months ago, you were a passenger on an airline jet, May 22nd, that had a very tragic ending, where nearly the entire crew and almost all of the passengers, save 2 people, perished in a most horrific and unfortunate commercial airline crash. And you were fortunate, lucky, serendipitously, one of the 2 surviving passengers. And today we're going to listen to you talk about that harrowing journey, how you have survived that, the lessons that you've learned, and what you can teach the rest of us on how to cherish and live our lives so that we don't have to live them as if we were the survivor of some tragic accident. First, I'd like to again thank our Pakistan colleagues in the Franklin Covey office for bringing you to our interview. I also like to pay respect to the crew and the passengers that were on the jet that you were on that did not survive. And I know that today you are here partially in their memory to represent them as well. So what I'd like to do is open with perhaps you talking about what is typically a fairly standard airline flight for you as the CEO of a major financial institution. You boarded a fairly common flight for you. I believe it was from Lahore to Karachi. Can you talk a little bit about the morning that led up to you boarding that plane and some of the traditions that you follow in terms of your seat selection, and talk about the process that came about prior to the plane taking off?
Yes, thank you, Scott. Thank you for a very comprehensive introduction and, for all the compliments as well. I'll try and do the justice to this opportunity that you've given to me today to talk about the leadership, to sharing my thoughts with you. In particular, how the life has changed my perspective post the accident. So to answer your question, it was a sort of interesting day. Everything seemed to be in kind of urgency. I was actually booked on another airline at 11 o'clock, but I've never been an early riser. And I decided to take that 1 o'clock flight instead because that gave me another 2 hours to be in the bed and be relaxed about it. It was a holiday. But for some odd reason, I still woke up ahead of time, ahead of the alarm time that I set for 9 o'clock, an hour before. And that resulted in my arrival at the airport much ahead of the required time. I arrived at the airport 1.5 hours before the flight takes off. Generally, for the local flights, it's between 40 minutes to an hour.
Right.
But in my case, I reached the airport, 1.5 hours ahead of time, which was very unusual for somebody like myself, who's been notorious for, reaching the airport at the nick of time. And that resulted in giving me the opportunity to pick the seat of my liking. I always like to sit on the window, on the aisle side, and I asked my colleague, the protocol guy there, to arrange an aisle seat for me. He had booked me for a window side seat, but then he changed it to aisle side. I think that was the beginning of my miracle, as that the location of seat played a very major role in terms of my eventual survival.
So to recap part of that, fairly standard flight for you. You're notorious for arriving late to the airport. On this particular day, you arrived early enough to where the airline steward could help you change your seat. You typically book a aisle seat. You were in a window seat. You had your seat changed. And you believe that that's part of the serendipity that may have resulted in your survival. You board the plane. You're sitting in seat, I think it is 1B. You're in the forward cabin. And because of the pandemic and protocols, I believe there were seats in between you, right? And it wasn't a fairly full plane that day. I think 97.
That's right.
Right, 97 passengers and crew. Fast forward to the process of takeoff.
So interestingly enough, the flight also took off ahead of time because, all passengers arrived on time. And as I told you, it seems as if there was some urgency in the air, and the pilot decided to take off even ahead of time. And we took off ahead of time. The flight has been fairly smooth. In fact, it was very smooth until it arrived at the Karachi airport 1.5 hours later and tried to land the first time. Now that's where the problem started. It seemed that the landing was smooth as well, but then the plane bumped 3 times on the runway, and then it took back up again in the air. Now that was very unusual and something which at least I never experienced in the past. When it went back up in the air, that was a very sharp sort of move, which kind of created an anxiety amongst the passengers and the cabin crew. And then it went back up again, almost 3,000 feet or something. And it took a round. And while it was coming back for the second attempt, apparently the engine failed. And then, this unfortunate accident happened.
So as we transition to the next part of this story, I'll just remind our viewers and listeners what Zafar is going to share with us next is quite emotional and visceral for many of us that spend time traveling like myself, 2 million miles on Delta Airlines alone. I've never had an experience like this. And again, Zafar in our pre-call was really quite deliberate around wanting to respect and mention for those that did not survive, that he continuously thinks about them. And so for all of us, our prayers and our thoughts are with the family members of those who passed in this horrible accident. Again, this was on May 22nd, 2020, not even about 10 months ago. Zafar has taken a flight from Lahore to Karachi, about an hour and 40-minute flight. It lands in Karachi, it bumps back up into the air, And before you share what happens next, Zafar, can you talk about what was going through your mind and the mood inside of the cabin as the plane lifted back up before the tragedy?
Yes, so, one of the two most emotional things that I experienced during this whole episode was one when I was, we were about to land for the second time. I would say almost 30 seconds ahead of the second attempt to land, there was a kind of a jerk in the air. And since I was sitting on the first seat, I saw the cockpit door open. And for some reason, although I could have seen from the window side on my left, but I was just looking straight, and I saw through the cockpit, windscreen, that the plane was nosediving. Now that was a very scary moment, and there were two air hostesses sitting across from me. There was steward sitting across from aisle from me, and their reactions were making me realize that there is something seriously wrong here, and perhaps it's the time that the plane is going to hit the ground. Um, and at that time, it seemed as if my entire life came in front of me on a canvas, from my childhood in Lahore to now coming back to Lahore as the CEO of Bank of Punjab, and now perhaps facing this horrible accident, which I probably won't survive. And this was a very interesting experience. And I told myself that, my life was okay. I think I did okay. There's nothing that I would regret, or there's nothing that I could think of that I could have done differently. So, I think it's okay. I'm ready to go. So for the benefit of everybody, I'm single, never got married, so had no responsibility of wife and kids. So therefore, being a single guy, I was much more sort of relaxed as far as the possible departure was concerned from this place.
Zafar, I want to compliment you on the courage that it is taking today to share this, because no doubt, as you will share in a moment, you had significant physical trauma, but I'm certain there's been emotional trauma to you as well. And so I want to just take a moment and pause and compliment you and recognize the courage and grace with which you are sharing this story. You mentioned that you knew something was perhaps tragically wrong because you could see the look on the face of you call them the air hostesses, we would call them flight attendants here in the United States. And of course, they're seasoned travelers, and you knew that something was going wrong. Talk next about what happened just prior to and perhaps even upon impact.
Yeah, so, no, thank you very much for the encouragement, Scott. It's actually very difficult to narrate it every time, but, I really want to do that because I believe that people need to know all of this. It may be a process of their learning, and I think I owe this to them to share my experiences, which could be helpful in their lives. So, suddenly I have the habit of talking to myself, and I believe that, my gut that I talk to responds, and that's God's voice. So I spoke to my God, and I said, God, I'm ready to go. I heard back that this is not your time. You are not going anywhere. And I just turned around and told him, look, it's inevitable. There's no way one can avoid this crash. And, survival is almost impossible because, it's just crash landing on the habitat. But he just turned around and I heard it from inside that, yes, while the plane is crashing, but I will survive. Now, that was a very, very revealing experience for me. That just reinforced my faith and commitment in my God and in myself. and how the God kind of is there for everybody, not just for myself. It's just a matter of you reaching out to the God, and God is there for you. I experienced that firsthand in my case. And as the plane started crashing, because I kind of knew that the plane will crash, I fainted even before the plane crashed. And I got the consciousness when I was already rescued. So that was very helpful in terms of managing my mental state.
So Zafar, just to recap some of that, you don't in any way mean to infer that others weren't provided with the ability to live. You're just talking about your own experience and your own inner dialogue with your Creator. You fainted prior to impact, and in fact, you don't, I think, by the grace of God or your Creator, don't remember that part of it. But the fact of the matter is, it was a nightmarish accident where of the 97 passengers and crew, everyone perished,
yes,
with the exception of you and one other passenger on the plane. And
that's correct.
It now has been recreated for you from the people that were on the ground and the investigators. Would you take as much time as you need, and would you recreate the process of your chair and the roof and the car and in the U.S. we call it the trunk. I think you may call it the boot, and the people in the car. Would you in the alley and the gate? Would you take some time and recreate that compelling and remarkable rescue that led to your survival? And then the second part of this interview, in terms of how it has now impacted your life, your legacy, your leadership style, and the culture inside of your organization.
Sure. So, since I fainted, I don't have any memory of what actually happened during that period when, I fell from the plane and I was rescued on the ground. But there are certain evidences. There are actually multiple people who have come to me and narrated me the same story. I never believed in miracles, Scott, and I always thought that it's a matter of chance. But in this particular case, it has reinforced my belief in miracles, because it's not a matter of one chance or two chance or three chance or four chance. It's a matter of multiple chances that creates a miracle. And in my case, this is exactly what happened. So starting from the seat change to aisle side, which resulted in my positioning on the plane, where the plane actually got broken up in three parts, and my seat fell down. And it fell right straight on the rooftop, almost 50, 60 feet from in the air, to a building which was almost 30 feet high, on the rooftop of a building, right straight on, not at any angle. If it was fallen on any angle, I would have lost my limb, I would have lost my senses if it was fallen upside down, but it went straight on the rooftop. And as you know, the seats of the aircraft has this flexibility inbuilt in them, which then resulted this seat to get a bounce on the rooftop and then went down on the road. Now, the second miracle, the third miracle, it's going down on the road, but this time round, it is not falling on the road. If I would have fallen on the road, I would have surely not survived. It fell on the bonnet of the car, in front of the car, the front side of the car. And then there was, the whole debris of the plane was also falling from the air on me. And the fourth miracle in this case, the fourth chance is what is the probability of somebody sitting in the car? It so happened that there were three people sitting in that car when I fell on the bonnet of that car. And, this was all happening in split seconds, and these people were just trying to escape and save themselves when they heard me, although I don't remember that, but they told me that they heard me asking for help, and they came back and they tried to drag me out of the debris, but they couldn't do it. And then they called, 4 or 5 people. It took almost a minute or two, and then those 5 people came. They removed the debris and they removed me from that place. And you know what? At that particular place where I had fallen, went burnt down in 2 minutes later.
Zafar,
literally 2 minutes later.
Zafar,
it's all captured in the camera.
It's riveting. And I want to take a moment to recap some of that, because what happens next is also riveting. The plane breaks apart in the air. You're in seat 1C. 1C falls about 60 feet. You land upright on a roof. You slide down this roof, and through luck or through plan or through chance, you land on the front of what in the United States we would call the hood. You call it the some other part. You land on the hood of this car with debris falling on you. There are 3 people that are in this car. They hear you, they see you.
Yes.
And between them and numerous other bystanders that are all in the midst of this plane crashing around them, they come to your rescue. You are alive.
That's correct.
You are semi-conscious. You are burned, you are injured, and you are traumatized, as are they. They manage to rescue you from the hood of the car. What happens next?
That's correct.
What happens next?
So, the next one was that, they took me to the ambulance. And the moment they put me in the ambulance, you know what the first question I asked them? I asked them, what happened to the rest of the passengers? Scott, do you believe it that, I didn't know anybody on that plane until later on I found out that there were some people, few of them who were very close to me, but otherwise I did not know at that time who the other passengers were. But for some odd reason, there was a strange bond between me and them.
Sure.
And this was the first question I asked the ambulance guy, and he told me he has no idea. I'm the first one who's been taken out from here. All they know is that the plane has crashed, but they don't know what happened to the others. Then they took me to the hospispital.
Zafar,
you know what?
Zafar, pause for a second, because if I remember correctly, there were some, again, serendipitous things that happened with alleyways and exits and gates and things. Would you recreate that for us?
Yes, for sure. Yes, for sure. I was, interestingly enough, when they escaped me from there, it was a very narrow road. And on that road, there was a dead end. So there was a plane which has crashed here, and then there was a dead end. The only way that I could be rescued and taken out to the ambulance and eventually to the hospital was through some kind of very narrow aisle. It's a narrow sort of a space between the 2 buildings, which is generally locked, by the way. For some odd reason, it was open that day. And then I was rescued from that very narrow sort of a passage, and then I was put on the ambulance on the main road, which took me to the hospital.
Zafar, you had fairly serious and extensive physical injuries, and I'm certain emotional recovery has existed as well. Talk briefly about the recovery, your injuries. Maybe speak to the other survivor. What do you know about that person? And then let's talk to, perhaps as important, some of the lessons and insights that you've learned.
So, Scott, before I jump to the injuries and the subsequent recoveries and all, I just want to share one more experience with you, because that defines my personality, and you can then relate that with my overall leadership style as well. So when they took me to the hospital, I again asked the same question. I said, what happened to the other passengers? And then I got the same response from them. And my second question was, can you get me a phone, please? I need to speak to my mother right away. Because I knew that she will be shattered. She would have found out about this horrible accident, but she wouldn't have known whether I'm surviving or not. And it could have resulted in a rather bigger damage to myself than I could even think of, or I would regret forever. The result was that, there was a lady doctor who came to me with the phone, and she dialed the number of my mother. It was shut. Then she called my father. I spoke to my father, and I told him that I'm fine, and I'm at the hospital. I'm so and so hospital. He never believed it. He called back and checked if that is true or he was dreaming. But that's actually what had happened.
Wow.
And then, I was taken to the hospital. My hand was broken from two places. My ligaments are all broken in my left knee. And then there is something called omitomo. I had suffered with that, which means that all your fluids go upside down, and your undesirable fluids start, depositing at some point where, it starts hurting you, and they need to be drained.
I see.
So there were 4 drains on me, on my leg, and then I was operated for my a broken hand, and there was one ligament which needed to be fixed right there and then. I was operated for that also. And by the way, in the midst of all of that, I had suffered corona also, and I went through corona as well. So anything and everything that could have gone wrong, while I was blessed to be alive, and God saved me, but I did face a lot of tough situation. With respect to the question that you asked about the other survivor, no, I never met him. I never spoke to him. I never met him. To tell you the truth, Scott, I actually avoid meeting up with him and with the families of the victims. Because, there is something called survivor's guilt. I don't know if you're aware of that, but I actually experienced it. It just arouses some kind of guilt in me that, these people would be thinking that, God has saved him miraculously. Why not our loved ones? And I have no answer to that. Even if I go to any of these death houses these days where the death has happened due to corona or anything, which is pretty much like an accident, it arouses that guilt in me. Although they may not be thinking that way, but I feel that they would be thinking, God, why him? Why not our loved one? And that is something which I'm still trying to grapple with. I'm still trying to get over that. But this is something which is definitely there in terms of my psychological stress.
Zafar, I think you have done a beautiful job of paying respect to the fellow passengers that perished. I don't know them as well. The world knew about this tragic plane crash. I remember it vividly, watching it on the news. And so I think from an American to a fellow Pakistani, I think you've done a beautiful job of paying tribute. And I understand, I can't comprehend, but I understand and can process the guilt and the pain that you have. There are so many more details we could talk about from this tragedy of which you have survived and now given a second chance. What I would like to do, mindful of our time, is I'd like to talk about some of the lessons that you've learned, because, there are no doubt insights, epiphanies that you have experienced from now, quote, having been given a second chance midway through your life, that all of us can benefit from experiencing from you without having to suffer through the same near-death experience. Before we go to those, I'd like to rewind a little bit and talk about the culture inside of your organization, perhaps even before the tragic accident, because you've talked and written quite extensively about the generosity, the magnanimity that the board of directors and you as the CEO continued on. You filled this role as CEO, had been, I believe, vacant for some time, and the board of directors had been at work in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, decimating the business culture marketplace. Talk a bit about the culture that you inherited when you became the CEO and some of the extraordinary measures that the leadership team took to take care of your employees.
Yeah. So Bank of Punjab, one needs to understand it's a public sector organization, of course. So public sector organization has its own challenges and compulsions and constraints. And then people who were at the helm of affairs, they were from a very old British banking background. So it was old British banking culture with the public sector culture in this organization, which kind of resulted into this organization being slightly behind in terms of changing times, particularly on the leadership side. Then the problem compounded because there has been no CEO on the helm of affairs, full-time CEO for the last 1.5 years when I took over. And that complicated the issues even further. So there were issues even before. There was lack of communication. There was lack of interaction and engagement with the employees. And then, there was there's been no CEO, so people were kind of lost and they had no idea where the bank is going. And on top of that, the real challenge was this pandemic, which left everybody unaware of how to deal with the situation. So it was a very complicated situation. I took over on the 16th of April, 2020, and it was right in the middle of pandemic. People did not have were not used to operating from home. They had the habit of coming to the offices. They were lost in terms of the future direction. They were actually looking some kind of communication from the senior leadership, plus the concrete measures to be taken for their own welfare and the welfare of their families, which were really jeopardized because of the pandemic. And I think I realized that even before taking over the helm of affairs. And on the day one, I had issued a letter, 2-page letter, outlining my priorities and how does that fit into the culture of Bank of Punjab and what I'm intending to do for these employees going into the future during my period as the CEO. On top of that, the board was already very conscious of, these concerns, and they had already approved a package, a special package which nobody in the industry had approved for the frontline employees of the bank who were endangering their lives in the call of duty. I had the choice of stopping that and saying that, industry, nobody's doing that in the industry. But really, Scott, I thought this is my time to prove myself and my, sort of mental creation, as Franklin Covey says, mental creation into physical creation. And I went ahead with that special bonus, which was a real turning point in terms of motivation of people, change in the culture, not just in the bank, but also in the entire industry. And certainly overnight, Bank of Punjab became the employer of choice, which has been out of the market for almost a couple of years from employment market, certainly became the chosen employer. And it helped me a lot in creating the team, which is right now is the best team in the banking industry in Pakistan.
Zafar, what you're describing is a cultural transformation that the Bank of Punjab has become a model for, really internationally, dealing with the devastating impacts of the pandemic, both on the public sector, the private sector, with families, with employees, what you and the board have done to build a culture that is, as you would say, the employer of choice for many people now is a gift to the world. Of course, you're dealing with this now as the new CEO. You are now the one of two surviving victims of this plane crash. Talk to our audience now, who may not be the CEOs of banks, but they might be a leader of their team, or they might be an entrepreneur, a founder. They might be a leader of their family. What are some of the lessons now, almost 10 months later from this tragic accident, that you have learned as a son, as a sibling, as a leader, friend? How has your life changed? How has your leadership vision changed?
Yes, no, it's a very interesting question, and thank you for asking this question, Scott, because it really changed the perspective in a big way. So, I always had a vision, my own style of management, but it has always been tentative. But after the plane crash, it has reinforced. And it's now, I'm very clear on what is really important for you in life. And that I learned because, the one emotional experience that I talked to you about is on my faith, speaking to the God about the other fellow passengers. And the third one is that, I was the kind of love and affection that I got from people after my survival made me realize that, what is important in life. And what is important in life is, in my very humble opinion, are two things. One is that you need to be, irrespective of what sort of job you are in, small or big, but you have to deliver it to the best of your abilities, and you should stand out and do that as something which is supposed to be done that way, in the best way possible. And trust me, people will respect you for that. The other important thing is that you need to understand other people's position, and you need to appreciate that what they are going through, which we call empathy, and we need to appreciate their position. We need to be honest with us, with themselves, and with our job and everything that we are dealing with. Now, these are very important things and I experienced that myself. And that made me sort of realize that a new concept to my mind is, which Franklin Covey also talks about, by the way, is management by empathy. I don't think nobody has coined this term as yet, but I'm very pleased to coin that in your interview today, which is management by empathy. I think this is my style of management. I believe that paycheck to purpose is more important than you being the largest or the highest paying employer in the market. You must attach the purpose to it. And an organization which is a public sector organization, which can't be the best paying entity in the market in any case, the purpose becomes even more important. And I think these are the two convictions that I have. Management by empathy. Secondly, paycheck to purpose. These are the two things that I think as the manager and leader, I would like to pursue.
Zafar, so beautifully said. Our co-founder, as you know, was Dr. Stephen R. Covey. He passed 10 years ago in his 80th year. Of course, the author of the worldwide best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In that book, and in that work session that our Pakistan office and Office Around the World helped to teach in organizations, Dr. Covey speaks about this concept called a transition figure. Someone that we may or may not know in our lives that is so inspiring and so compelling that it leads us as a guide, as a light to transition our own lives, our own legacies. And I think Dr. Covey, no doubt, would call you a transition figure. I would like to, in front of millions of people, invite you to perhaps be featured in one of our forthcoming books. We write books. We have sold 50 million copies of our books. And if you would be so inclined, we would love to collaborate with you and perhaps in one of our future books, highlight your story as a transition figure for the world. Is that something you might be willing to entertain?
Scott, I'm really touched. I'm really touched. I'm really honored. It was not just the interview that I was really excited about, but this book is making me even more exciting. In fact, what I would suggest is, and I leave that thought with you, I'll be very happy to co-author a book on empathy, the management by empathy as well. I'll be very happy to feature in on any of the publications that you will author. I'm a big fan of yours, by the way, reading you all through. And if you think that, the management by empathy makes sense, then I'll be very happy to co-author a sort of book with you on this topic. The way the world is changing, Scott, I think the management by empathy piece will become even more important going into the future. Post-pandemic, this will be the most important thing to my mind, and particularly in the countries like ours, although this holds true across the globe, but particularly in the countries like ours, where there's no formal social security system exists. I think the employers play the role of that social security net, and I think management by empathy will help them in sort of understanding and appreciating that it is people who are matters more than the profit itself alone. Yeah. So maybe a compromise on the profit a bit, but it's the people and their development, their own people, that help the sustenance of their business going into the future for a longer period of time and for the future generations.
Zafar, again, beautifully said. I'd like to end on this one final question, and I'll try to simplify it. You mentioned that you're not married, you don't have children. You certainly have a large family and relationships and friends and colleagues that are very important to you. In light of that, what do you think your legacy would have been prior to this experience with the jet crash? And what will be your legacy now as a result of the physical and emotional trauma and pain and healing, hopefully? How will your legacy be different as a result of this unfortunate but also inspiring turn of events in your life?
Yeah, so, Scott, before the accident, I was kind of quite clear on what the way I would like to be remembered, the impact that I would like to create. But that was all sort of tentative. There were 3 or 4 or 5 objectives that I was kind of pursuing. But now, after the accident, I'm very clear. It's all about you and your connection with your people. Money, fame, all disappears. It is the relationship that rests with you and carries you through and your legacy. And I think this is what is more important. And you only make relationships if you are an honest human being to yourself, to them, and to your own job. Whatever you do, you need to do that with the full conviction and honesty. And I think this is the way I would like to be remembered, that he was a very honest man when it came to his dealings with people. And trust me, for a successful career also, it's the people skill and it's the relationship that's most helpful in your growth and your success. And they just can't come through if you're not a good human being, if you don't have empathy in you. And empathy is the turning point in your career, in your personal lives. And I think that is something I'm very, very clear about. There are, sort of a few learnings, Scott. If you allow me, I just would like to share that with you as well.
Please.
for your audience, if we have time.
Yes, please continue.
Okay, so during this accident and post this accident, there are 8 or 10 learnings that I have kind of have to share which may help people in realizing how they need to pursue their lives. First of all, I think that it's um, following rituals is not it's not necessarily the end all and the be all. Rituals are important, very important, but there is more to that than just the rituals. So we need to understand that we need to do something substantive for the people as well, which make our God happy, than merely the rituals. Because I am not a big follower of rituals, but there was something that my God liked and saved me that day. Then you need to be very clear on what your priorities in life are. How do you want to be remembered? For example, in my case, I would like to be remembered as a change agent. And I think people also need to understand how they would like to be remembered, post their departure from this world. By the way, Scott, I believe that I am living on bonus life now. It's a borrowed heaven for me. I don't know if you've heard this song, Borrowed Heaven, from the Course, the Irish band.
I don't think so, but I see the concept, yeah.
Yeah, and that song, I related to it right after my accident. I would encourage everybody to listen to that song because, I could relate to each and every word in that song.
Wow.
The third one is trust people. People are generally good people, but there are few individuals which are here and there are sort of odd, but then this is your choice to deal with them. But try and trust people. Give them chance. Tolerance and forgiveness is very, very important when you come to trusting people. And I think this is very important, and this is my third lesson. The fourth one is, and it's a very, very important one, arrogance is a killer. You really need to get that out of your system. This plane crash happened because the pilot was arrogant. He did not listen to the air traffic controller, and he just decided to land while he was very sharp on his landing period. He should have taken a longer route to land, but he just decided that he has to come down straight from the top, and that resulted in his plane to go back up again. And the result was that we lost 97 souls, innocent souls. So, humanity, humbleness, and magnanimity are very, very important. And arrogance is something which is a true killer, especially when you are in a position of control and power. Number 5, you have to be, as I've been emphasizing, you have to be honest and sincere to yourself and the people who are relying on you. This is probably the most difficult thing, where you need to advise people at times when they're looking for your advice, compromising on your vested interest. But trust me, people will love you for that. People will respect you for that, and that will be your legacy for them. Number 6, clear all your dues. There shouldn't be anything owed to anybody, whether it's financial or otherwise. Make sure that you pay what is due to them, and pay them at the right time. Respond to them at the right time. Even if these are words of affection, please do that without any delays, without even thinking twice. Number 7, I believe in miracles. I never believed on them, as I said earlier, but I now believe on them. Because it's as I said, they do happen. They really, really do happen. And we must believe on those miracles. Number 8, willpower and courage. So, I would have been in a very different mental state if I would have not joined the office virtually 1 month after my plane crash. And that kept me distracted, and that kept me engaged with my work and not to think of that horrible accident and the experience that I went through. I had kind of invented a new idea of working from home to working from hospital bed, literally. But trust me, that paid off. So I believe that work is life and life is work. And you need to be doing this. Please realize that with the proper balance with your family. But for me, it was a lifesaver. Number 9, God gives opportunity to everybody, but you have to take certain bold steps, as we call it entrepreneurship as well. Even if you are in a paid job, you need to take certain bold steps. You need to go ahead of your call of duty to prove yourself as worthy for the next level promotion, for the next level responsibility. And I think that matters a lot. So willpower and courage and taking the bold decision, which I took when I was traveling back, as you said, Scott, that, I realized on the deathbed that, not the deathbed, but recovery bed of the hospital, that, my God has given me this borrowed heaven now. I have to prove myself by doing something bold and different, which proves my mettle also. And my decision was to, go by the same plane, on the same seat, on the same airline. First time when I traveled after 4 months of my plane crash. Last but not the least is communication. And the communication becomes more important during the times of crisis. So my communication with my God, in fact, lack of communication on the part of the pilot, if he would have announced stress, it would have probably saved a few more souls. My communication with my mother, my communication with my staff, with my employees, before the plane crash and after the plane crash, has created a special bond in me and them. And last but not the least, and thank you, Scott, for giving me that opportunity of communicating with the rest of the world, with all the audience out there, that, I would like to share my life experiences, which very few people have experienced. And I really hope and wish that nobody experiences that. It's not the most proud moments or something that, one could wish for. But trust me, I would really like to share those views and how that affected my life and changed my life with as wider an audience as possible, both on the commercial side of the business and otherwise. So thank you very much, Scott. Thank you for your entire team. Thank you for Franklin Covey Pakistan.
Zafar Masud, creator, popularizer of Management by Empathy, thank you for your time today. Look forward to reconnecting with you and talking about a collaboration on a future Franklin Covey book. Your time and
look forward.
Yeah, your time is a gift to the millions of people listening and watching to us. Look forward to seeing you again in the future, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much.
And a special thanks again to our longtime trusted and valued partners in our Pakistan office. The Franklin Covey Pakistan team are helping to create cultures of greatness and developing great leadership throughout their country. Again, I thank you for the connection with our new friend Zafar, and we will see you back here next week for another discussion on leadership.